Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Brief for Tuesday, May 7, 2024. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Michael Jenkins, president of the Washington Times Foundation, which sponsors this webcast. Dr. Jenkins is also chairman of the Washington Times Holdings, the LLC that owns the Times news organization. He has led many successful fact-finding trips to Korea for policy experts and peace initiatives to the Middle East for the Universal Peace Federation. Dr. Jenkins, welcome.
Welcome, everyone, to our program of the Washington Brief for this month. Our topic is Policy and Strategy in the Age of Expanded Threats, Unpacking the U.S. Japan-Philippines Trilateral Summit. Our guest panelist today is a very well-respected expert in this area, Lieutenant General Chip Gregson. Lieutenant General Gregson retired from the Marines in 2005. He last served as commander of U.S. Marine Corps Forces Pacific, commanding General Fleet Marine Force Pacific, and commander U.S. Marine Corps Bases Pacific, headquartered at Camp H.M. Smith in Hawaii. He previously served as commander of 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force and commander Marine Corps Bases in Japan. Commissioned in 1968 from the U.S. Naval Academy, General Gregson served in Vietnam in the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion from February 1969 to August 1970. Following retirement from the Marine Corps, he joined the U.S. Olympic Committee as Chief Operating Officer. On 13th of May 2009, following Senate confirmation, he assumed responsibility as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs, a post he held for 2 years until April 2011. He is now in business as president of W.C. Gregson and Associates, a strategic consulting company he formed in 2006. Our moderator today is Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. He's a commentator on security issues. Formerly, Ambassador DeTrani was special envoy for the six-party talks with North Korea, the director of National Counterproliferation Center, and associate director of National Intelligence. Dr. Alexandre Mansourov is going to give the response for our panel. Dr. Mansourov is an adjunct professor of security studies at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He also is adjunct professor of Korean studies in the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Ambassador DeTrani, it's going to be a great program. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the introduction. We're very honored to have General Gregson with us today. We will drill down on the very successful visit of Prime Minister Kishida to Washington just a few weeks ago, and the trilateral with the President Marcos Jr. Also, to be discussed will be a bit on North Korea and what they're doing with the Russian Federation. And as we see the war in Ukraine continues and the war in Gaza continues, a lot of issues out there. And as we speak, we have President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China visiting France, and he will move on to Serbia and Hungary. So there's a lot to unpack, a lot to discuss, and we're very fortunate in having General Gregson to help us understand these issues and fully discuss them. So over to you, General Gregson, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins and Ambassador DeTrani, for the kind introduction, and thanks to the Washington Times Foundation for the work you do to ask the right questions. And I think the question posed for this discussion is the right one. What adjustments in thinking and policy should be undertaken? My short answer is that we need to make big changes at the national level, at a whole of nation level, not just adjustments. We must recognize the intent of our adversaries, and the numbers are increasing, to intimidate, divide, and disintegrate the United States and our allies. The absence of armed conflict, for now, does not mean the absence of existential threat. We are not winning, and victory is not in sight. The gathering war clouds show increasing alignment of authoritarian governments and anarchic subnational elements determined to replace the global system that has thus far prevented another global conflict like the wars of the early 20th century. It's been called an axis of upheaval as our adversaries unite to overturn the world order. Hal Brands of the American Enterprise Institute compares today's geopolitical situation to the period of the late 30s on the eve of World War II. Today's political issues of how the world is to be governed are similar, driven by the combustible mix of religion, culture, historical grievances, and revanchist territorial ambitions amidst accelerating technological changes to warfare. The Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939 became a testing ground for new military technologies as fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and various international volunteer brigades from Europe and the United States piled into the fight. The bombing of Guernica, immortalized by Pablo Picasso, previewed what a lot of World War II would look like. If only we had paid attention. Perhaps the combat in Ukraine, the Red Sea, Gaza, and other places mentioned by Ambassador DeTrani will be another testing ground for new technologies. If things are not going as well as we would like, then change is needed. But before changing anything, we need to look at our own thinking and what drives our views of the world. One of our great Americans of the 19th century, Mark Twain, said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just isn't so." We have at least three things we know for sure that drive our decisions. We always predict wars will be short, and our record is perfect. We're wrong every time. We did have a short war over Kuwait once, but we came back later to make it into a long war. And we always believe that the most recent war is the last one, and that victory means there's nobody left to fight. After World War II, we precipitously demobilized our forces. As a result, we were almost ejected from the Korean Peninsula by an army that did not exist in 1950 when Japan surrendered. After the Cold War, we dismantled our political warfare organizations and reduced our forces. We greatly reduced our defense industrial base. We're paying for that now as we have to get allied assistance to help fill in gaps for the Ukrainians. Most importantly for our situation today, we believe peace and war, active conflict, are binary and mutually exclusive states of national existence. George Kennan, the author of the famous Long Telegram that formed much of the framework for the Cold War, published a second memorandum. It was called The Inauguration of Organized Political Warfare. He said that the United States was handicapped by a popular attachment to the concept of a basic difference between peace and war, by a tendency to view war as a sort of sporting context outside of all political context, and by a reluctance to recognize the realities of international relations, the perpetual rhythm of struggle in and out of war. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, we set up the People's Republic of China into the existing international system. It was not a bad decision at the time by the first Clinton administration. Maybe Deng Xiaoping was the real deal. At any rate, the American public was not ready to face another enemy, and the peace dividend was popular. Our error was it took us 6 presidential administrations, a true bipartisan effort, to realize that the People's Republic of China was not following our script and becoming more wealthy and more democratized and more liberal. This, despite the declaration of undisputed historical sovereignty over the entire South China Sea, the broken agreement over Scarborough Shoal, the dredging of massive amounts of coral to build outposts on maritime features in the South China Sea, the promise at the Sunnyland Summit that China would not militarize those artificial features, a promise, needless to say, promptly broken. Today, Beijing is engaged in forceful confrontation with Japan and the Philippines. It also supports Russia, Iran, and Middle Eastern subnational elements. Casualties have been taken by Philippine forces. China's Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone engage nearly daily with Philippine vessels attempting resupply of the BRP Sierra Madre at Second Thomas Shoal. Beijing supports their no-limits partner, Russia's assault on Europe through money, fuel, and other supplies. The Chinese Communist Party wages a bitter information war that we are losing despite our natural advantages. Fake images and anti-Israeli and anti-American propaganda is inserted into social media, particularly TikTok. Our response to China's human rights abuses, aggression toward Taiwan, and other issues is silence. We are not defending our own beliefs and principles. Militarily, we are at a major disadvantage. The Western Pacific is a maritime theater. China has 350 warships, the U.S. 290. China is active across the Pacific, politically and economically, to cut our lines of support. Recent events in the Solomon Islands show their intent in another echo of the pre-war late 1930s. Aerial and naval violations of Taiwanese space are increasing, and the information war is intensifying. Fixing this won't be done overnight, but we must move quickly. We must be candid about China despite it being uncomfortable. We need more forces in the Western Pacific to ensure we can maintain support for our allies and friends in the first island chain. Logistics stores must be increased. Access to facilities must be increased. New weapons must be introduced to us and our allies. We must rebuild our political warfare institutions to make our case for liberal democracy and human rights, to get our message to the people of China, and to make our case to our own population and our allies. We must rebuild our defense industrial base. We are decommissioning ships faster than we are building them. Chinese citizens and their financial assets are leaving China. We can win this fight, but we need to compete, not merely manage the relationship. Thank you.
Wow, that was quite a presentation, General Gregson. Thank you for those very, very thoughtful but insightful views. So much to unpack with that. And you talked quite a bit about People's Republic of China, correctly so, the former Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, and the dynamics in the region, but also certainly our allies in Japan, and the tension with the China and the Philippines over the Second Thomas Shoal and some other issues there. So let's dive into this discussion, and I'll look to Dr. Mansourov to start it off. Please, Dr. Mansourov.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador, and greetings to everyone. What an outstanding presentation by General. Let me start first by congratulating our global audience with the 4th year of our podcast. Today, this is our 37th program, and thanks to the dedicated leadership by President of the Washington Times Foundation, Michael Jenkins, and steady support by Chris Dolan from the Washington Times, this program has been on the air for 3 years now, going into the 4th year. And of course, we owe a profound debt of gratitude to Ambassador DeTrani for his unswerving and outstanding guidance and chairmanship of this program over the past 3 years. So thank you very much, Ambassador, for being there for us. Now, that said, let me make a couple of points with respect to what General Gregson said. Now, General, I was really pleased every time I visited our proud Marines on Camp Smith or in Korea or in Japan, because their hospitality was amazing, and I learned quite a lot. And so those days when you hosted me in Hawaii and in Japan, they were remarkable. I vividly remember them. So thank you very much for your hospitality back from those times. Now,
it's kind of you to mention that.
yes, I'll start with some basic questions, and further down the road, I will ask you a curveball question, if you don't mind. But let me start easy, and that is the U.S. Japan-Philippines summit. We read about it a couple of weeks ago, and then it's gone. I mean, so my question to you is, was it really consequential? Or was it something which, I don't know, 3 months from now, a year from now, nobody will even remember? Especially given the political developments in Japan. I mean, with Prime Minister Kishida, his popularity is sinking. I mean, there are rumors that he may not even survive this fall. Elections within the LDP. And of course, the Philippines people, some people looking back at the former President Duterte's kind of bromance with President Putin, with the country kind of swinging back and forth, and they wonder whether it's really a reliable ally or not. So my simple question to start our conversation is that, one, is it really something of significance, that trilateral summit? Did they really accomplish anything there? Or this is something which, like a footnote in the history books, and we won't even remember it a year from now? Well, what's your take on this?
I think it's really significant, and it's a sign of changing attitudes and changing international threats. When I first started professionally commuting to Asia, the relationship between the Philippines and Japan was completely different. The old attitudes die hard, old memories die hard. That has changed, and it's changed a lot because of efforts in both the Philippines and Japan. Typhoon Haiyan came through the Philippines, massive devastation. The Japanese responded quickly. They sent down a ship with not only self-defense forces aboard to help with the recovery from the typhoon, but they also brought down a number of Japanese non-governmental aid-giving organizations. 3 weeks later, I listened to the Philippine ambassador, or the Philippine ambassador to Japan in a lecture depart from his notes to say that we in the Philippines consider Japan an ally. So demonstrated cooperation, demonstrated help was on the way then. What's changed now, Prime Minister Kishida is still performing the duties of Prime Minister. His troubles are on the domestic side with the political funding scandal. Imagine that. We've never had that here. His foreign policy still has strong support, and 84% of the Japanese public, by polling figures, support increases in Japan's defense forces. The connection between the Philippines and Japan is forced by geography and technology. For decades, following the end of World War II, Japan and the Philippines were out of range of any mainland threat. That's no longer true now with the Chinese military buildup, with the advent of weapons that are accurate at distance, coupled with massive surveillance and all the things that we're familiar with. So you have the Japanese political leadership stating that the security of Taiwan is Japan's security, the security of the Philippines is Japan's security, and there's no pushback. There's no resistance to that notion. A lot of work needs to be done to make that into a reality, but nevertheless, it's a declared political condition. And the summit that I think was not envisioned even a year or so ago. The summit between President Marcos, Prime Minister Kishida, and President Biden is historic, nailing this down as official cooperation and setting the stage for agreed upon exchanges of technology and exchange of forces. Added to this, the Japanese and the Philippines are executing a reciprocal access agreement for their militaries. This means the possibility of Philippine forces training in Japan, Japanese forces training in the Philippines, alongside Australian and United States forces who have previously executed agreements with the Philippines on these things. So significant, yes, indeed. It's the democracy starting to muster to push back against the pressures that they're getting.
You know, let me just weigh in, Alexander, and I'll go right back to you, Alexander. I know you have another question, but on the summit of Prime Minister Kishida with President Joe Biden, and I thought it was a very successful summit. Let me just read a quote from what Prime Minister Kishida said to our Congress, our joint session of Congress, a very special honor to the Prime Minister of Japan, when he addressed the joint session of Congress. And let me just quote him. "The leadership of the United States is indispensable. Without U.S. support, how long before the hopes of Ukraine would collapse under the onslaught from Moscow? Without the presence of the U.S., how long before the Indo-Pacific would face even harsher realities? Ukraine of today may be East Asia of tomorrow." So my question to you, General Gregson, is, are we providing that leadership? Are we there? You talked about, and I think correctly so, the South China Sea. You talk about the disputed islands, China's claims to the whole of the South China Sea, despite the UN tribunal that ruled against China in this regard. Is the U.S. there providing that leadership? And will we be there to provide the leadership for Japan, but not only for Japan, but for our allies and partners in East Asia?
We're there, but we need to be more there. Let me try and explain that. When the Philippines took the case of the South China Sea to the Court of Arbitration, Vietnam joined in supporting the Philippines. We remained silent. When the UN court came down with their verdict that China was in violation and they did not have the rights that they were declaring they had, we again remained silent. These were egregious errors, I think, on our part. You mentioned Ukraine. After World War II, the Japanese put a lot of faith into the United Nations. They bought into the ideals of it. And the idea that you could have two permanent members of the Security Council engaged in naked aggression, Russia and China, kind of knocked the slats out from under belief in the UN as being the salvation. So that gave the green light, or ended up giving the green light, to Japan's doubling of their defense budget. Skeptics say, oh, yeah, but it's only 2% going to 4%. Well, yes, but it's a doubling, and it's more than we're spending on defense. So the attitudes have changed out there, and we need to step up and be more present, not just in a physical presence, but more present in ideology, declaration of principles, and all those political warfare things that we used to be good at during the Cold War, but have somehow forgotten how to do in the years after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Thank you, General Gregson. Please, Alexander.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. In general, of course, you're a strategic thinker. And so I'd like to ask you the big question on strategy related to your opening statement. You said that the U.S. is not winning, that the victory is not in sight, and our global enemies are advancing. And specifically, you referred to the axis, the new axis of evil, the axis of authoritarian states, Russia and China, pushing the United States and trying to displace American global leadership. And so my big question to you is whether it's a good idea or bad idea to confront these two great powers at the same time. We know Henry Kissinger back in the 70s with President Nixon designed a different strategy. They took advantage of the Soviet-Chinese schism and tried to basically pit Moscow against Beijing to advance American interests in East Asia and globally, and succeeded in that. And yet today, the U.S. policy, U.S. strategy is different. I mean, we're taking on these two very powerful states at the same time simultaneously, essentially not driving wedges, but bringing them together. And we'll see in a couple of weeks, President Putin and Chairman Xi will have a summit meeting in Beijing, and they will probably push the envelope further, showing that really maybe there are no limits to that new strategic partnership, as you said. So is it a wise strategy or not, from your opinion, for Washington to kind of, instead of manipulating, taking advantage, trying to drive wedges, to push these two great powers to collude and join forces to resist U.S. global leadership?
I think they would collude regardless of what we did. This is not the 1960s, 1970s, and the ultimate, to borrow a phrase from the Chinese, the ultimate wisdom of Kissinger's policy has yet to be determined over time. The way we are losing is in the battle of perceptions. The egregious delay in getting approval for aid to Ukraine is not comforting to our allies and friends. As Ambassador DeTrani mentioned, the Japanese see this, and the Japanese see Ukraine, the threat to Ukraine, as a threat to East Asia, and I agree. We're not standing on our principles, and we're trying to manage these relationships, which leads to endless process things. And as Ambassador Trani certainly remembers, the ultimate good day is when you had a good meeting with one of these guys. The meeting is not the goal. The concrete actions on the ground are the goal. And we have economic pressures, legal and illegal. We've got political pressures from both of these states, and we need to stand up and be present and be more present in Asia. The other point about, of course, taking on taking on Russia and China at the same time, and your characterization is, which way do we want to go? Do we want to pile into Europe and leave Asia on its own? Or do we want to pile into Asia and leave Europe on its own? I don't see either as a choice. It's got to be both, and we can do both. But we need to realize that absent actual kinetic combat, we're under attack now, and we need to respond.
Thank you, General Gregson. No, let me just make a comment and ask you another question, if I may. Look, Japan is sitting in a very precarious area and is facing a lot of threats. And I think immediately to what's happening in North Korea. I think Prime Minister Kishida did reach out to Kim Jong-un, indicating his willingness to have a meeting, a summit with him. And North Korea's foreign minister just last month, Chuk Sung-hui, Chae made it very clear they're not interested in a dialogue with the government of Japan to talk about certainly to talk about the abductee issue, which is still on the table for the people of Japan, because there's so much that's needs to be answered in regards to the abductee issue. But facing the if you will, not only the political onslaught, but the weapons, the military threat, and if you will, intimidation from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, when the sixth nuclear test in 2017 was a thermonuclear test, and they're launching all these, submarine launch ballistic missile, cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, and they're moving back, and now embracing the Russian Federation and supporting Russia's war in Ukraine. So, I mean, Japan is sitting and watching this, and then looking at, the South China Sea, and as you mentioned, General Gregson, the Taiwan Strait, and China's intimidation of Taiwan, as we saw this prior to the election of President Lai Ching-te, and now we will see the inauguration this month. So my question to you is, given all these developments in the region for the government of Japan, I think it was encouraging, at least from where I was sitting, to hear President Joe Biden say that the government of Japan is possibly looking at joining AUKUS and getting involved, and certainly getting involved in exercises, military exercises with Australia and indeed the Philippines, as we recently saw. So what do you think about Japan getting more involved with organizations like alliances like AUKUS and so forth? And what is the sentiment in Japan for the people of Japan when they see these developments in North Korea? Or is that affecting their willingness to support the government's focus now on building more of a military capability, and possibly even maybe looking at having their own nuclear deterrent? Is there movement in that direction?
You packed an awful lot of it in there. Let me take them in reverse order. The AUKUS has a pillar 2, which involves sharing of sharing of technology, sharing of knowledge, sharing of things short of nuclear. The nuclear submarines will be reserved for Great Britain, the United States, and Australia, but Japan is lately very welcome to join in Pillar 2, because they not only can they share technology that's developed elsewhere, but they have their own very high technological capability too that can be brought to bear on this. So we would look forward to that in the future. Connected to that is the threat from the DPRK. North Korea has launched more missiles recently than ever before, so they're clearly enjoying this. So back to my fondness for Mark Twain. Another thing that we know that's just not so is that sanctions work against North Korea, that they're a backward country, et cetera. They're not. They're a global criminal cartel, and sanctions never work against North Korea because there's way too many people willing to help them break the sanctions. And we have never been willing or probably even able to exercise all the energy needed to defeat North Korea's sanction busting efforts, especially since they share a border with Russia and another border with China, plus all the illegal seaborne trade. So North Korea's threat is what it is. It's going to remain modern because they're able to trade on a global black market and arms proliferation. So they have all the technology that you can dream about. And I'm very conscious that the person in this podcast that knows most about North Korea is you, after all the painful trips there. The Japan and the people of Japan look to us to be able to help protect them from North Korea. And the other thing, and extending from that, we need to start thinking primarily that we're protecting the people of Japan and not just protecting military bases and things like that, which is what people tend to think of when they start talking missile defense and protecting things. No, you got to protect the high value target, which is the lives of our Japanese friends, and we can do this, but it's going to require some effort, and it's going to take some resources. Taiwan has been suffering under increasing pressure from the Chinese since late in the Tsai Ing-wen administration, and they changed, I believe it's on May 20th. Big Kim Chao, the incoming vice president, is talking about, is in the paper today, talking about Taiwan having to build up its own defenses and develop its own weapons and things. And so they know what their situation is. Taiwan is eminently defendable, but needs help, and the Taiwanese need to follow Big Kim Chao's direction and make some reforms in our own military establishment. But our commitment to Taiwan, as President Biden has said, I believe 6 times, is ironclad, and we will come to the defense of Taiwan, despite his handlers rushing around afterwards to say, well, what the president meant to say was, no, what he meant to say was that, yes, we will fight for Taiwan. And I'm glad he said it, because that's got to be clear. And sort of in the tenor of the rest of my remarks, we need to be much more clear with China on what we'll put up with, what we won't put up with. So I missed a lot of what you asked about it, but if there's something else you want to counterattack on.
What about the abductee issue? Do you see any possibility of movement on that issue?
Yes, depending on what Japan wants to give up. And North Korea is not doing this out of any desire to reach a rapprochement or to turn down the pilot light on a running issue. They will show the signs of movement on this if it's to their raw advantage. I don't think any other way. There may have been a political component in Prime Minister Kishida trying to create a new conversation in addition to the political funding scandal. But a lot of time has passed, and I don't know that we will ever see any real cooperation on this issue.
Yeah, that's a little, to be blunt, it's a little surprising to me, because thinking back to 2002, with Prime Minister Koizumi visited and met with Kim Jong-il, there was a sense there, I believe, on the part of North Korea that, look, there's so much money on the table, whether it was $20 billion or more. Now it's certainly much more than the $20 billion. That would be major for North Korea. And I think that was part of the impetus, the motive behind, if you will, Kim Jong-il admitting to having abducted, he said, 13 Japanese nationals. 8 passed away, and they would return 5. And this is the pushback from Japan, where the people of Japan and the government of Japan is saying they're more than 13. We need to have clarity on this issue here. But there's so much money on the table for North Korea to fess up on this issue, to be more transparent on the issue. Why the reluctance?
I don't know. And we could talk to somebody much more knowledgeable on this than I am, but there appears to have been a change between Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un. And what influence his sister has, I don't know what else is changing in North Korea, but the patina or the veneer of cooperation is certainly been shattered. And I don't know what it all means. I'm not clever enough to figure that out, other than the fact that North Korea remains a mystery.
Thank you, General Gregson. Please, Dr. Mansourov.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Again, General, you're a strategic thinker, so let me ask you another kind of question of strategy. Ukraine occupies a lot of policy space, policy attention, and the Biden administration declared its goal, strategic objective, to deliver a strategic defeat to Russia in that war. We know from past history that any war in Europe usually is advanced by concomitant efforts in Asia as well, whether it's the Eastern War, the original Crimean War of the 1850s, when the British and French used the Japanese ports to attack Kamchatka and the Kuril Islands, whether it's 1904-05 war, which kind of strained Russian resources between the West and East, the Second World War, the same. So with the U.S. efforts to put more pressure, military pressure on Russia, different fronts in the North, in the Caucasus, I'm just curious whether, it would be a good idea or bad idea for Japan, from your standpoint, to, and it's alternative thinking here, to open a second front, if you wish, military front by intervening in the war in Ukraine. Again, you may say, oh, it's ridiculous, it's utterly impossible, but Japan historically has been known for these radical shifts in its foreign policy and for surprise attacks, unexpected attacks, whether it's Pearl Harbor, whether it's Port Arthur. So my question is very simple. What is the probability, in your opinion, of Japan's intervention in the Ukrainian war, not by economic sanctions, which they already joined, not by political or diplomatic pressure, which they're already levying on Russia, but with military force? And if they do that, again, I know it's highly speculative, but would it be in the U.S. interest? I mean, would it advance the U.S. goal of delivering a strategic defeat to Russia? And finally, if they do intervene, what would be, in your opinion, what should be the aim of that military intervention? Just thinking outside the box here, because that's the worry, believe it or not, that's the worry of Russian military strategists sitting in the General Staff office in Moscow. They look at the situation again, they know history very well. They know that there is a huge mismatch between the military requirements in the Far East in Russia and the military capabilities of the Russian Pacific Fleet and Far Eastern Military District, which is undermanned, underarmed, understaffed, and most of its units really have been deployed to Ukraine, as you know. So that threat, potential threat of Japanese intervention in that war, whether with the U.S. ally, backed by the U.S. ally, quote unquote, outside the scope of the alliance, but it's there in terms of strategy. And that's why they need China, one reason. That's why they want to have North Korea harassing Japan all the time. That's why they don't mind the Taiwanese contingency or Southeast China contingency, because all that would divert Japan's attention away from the North to the South, just like it happened in the past. So what's your take on this kind of thinking?
You raised some very interesting scenarios that are very intriguing in my own view. It's taken a long time for the Japanese public to get comfortable with a self-defense force. It's the residual from being lied to by their government for the 20 years prior to World War II and for all the years of World War II when they were told victory is ours, et cetera, only to find out that those ships they saw over the horizon were flying a different flag. The Japanese forces capable of doing a good defense of Japan. And Japan has 6,852 islands to defend, if you believe the National Geographic database. So they've got their hands full with just that. And I'm not sure that the Japanese public would countenance picking a fight with anybody that's that's on their borders now. I don't think that's in the cards at all, and I don't think that would be politically viable. I will say
the
that
Japanese government just declared the Kuril Islands as occupied islands, which is a departure from the traditional stance. And we know, of course, the traditional claims to these territories. Now, Ambassador, if you don't mind, in general, I'll ask you a curveball question. This is something which kind of made big headlines in the Republic of Korea last week. Our President Trump, in his interview to the Time magazine, said that the Republic of Korea should really increase its contribution to the burden sharing scheme. And he kind of amplified it by saying either you pay up or we'll withdraw or reduce the U.S. troop presence in Korea. My question is simple. I mean, what do you make of that comment from our president? Is it just a bargaining ploy? Is it a knee-jerk reaction to the Ukraine funding bill, $100 billion just taken out of the U.S. taxpayers' pockets? And so it's psychologically understandable. Is it personal because of the way the South Korean government treated the former president? Or is it setting the stage for possibly some future negotiations with North Korea, about disarmament, arms control, kind of lifting the veil a little bit, what he might be willing to do as a concession to North Korean agreement to disarm? Is he serious? I mean, is he serious or not? So what's your thinking about it? And why is it that we always want to cut back our presence in South Korea, but nobody talks about our presence in Japan? Nobody wants to remove U.S. forces from Japan or put any pressure on Japan. I mean, what's going on here? Many South Koreans wonder.
I have no idea what President Trump was talking about, and I think if you parse his words, it's nonsense. He doesn't understand what the Koreans pay for the forces they maintain. He doesn't understand the situation, and our alliances with Korea and with others is not a dues-paying club like Mar-a-Lago. It's fundamentally based on shared values. And Korea is a remarkable example of a country that started out as a military dictatorship. South Korea started out as a military dictatorship and became a thriving, raucous democracy. And that's very, very much in the U.S. favor. We profited hugely in the wake of, for the whole second half of the 20th century up into the present on the success of our allies. And South Korea has shown to be a remarkable success. And by the way, their forces have fought in every war I've been involved in on our side. So it's not exactly charity on the reason we're in South Korea. We're there in support of our national interest. It's not, like I said, a dues-paying thing. Why is presence in the Republic of Korea an issue and it's not in Japan? It is in Japan in a sense, but it takes a different form. We've had going back to, we ceased to be the occupying power in Japan in 1951, with the exception of the prefecture of Okinawa, where we remained the occupying power. And we stayed there as the occupying power until 1972, and that created some bad habits on the American side, and it also created a lot of resistance on the Japanese side. So we've had issues, but we've been able to solve them with Japan, and we've been able to solve them with Korea. And the more we stay in sync with South Korea on not just the military facts of life, but in principles and values, the longer the relationship will prosper.
No, listen, let me just say I totally agree with General Gregson on your answer to a very good question from Dr. Mansourov. I think our South Korean allies have just been a great success story, emblematic of what a country can do, as you mentioned, General Gregson, moving from, if you will, a military dictatorship in the 60s to a thriving, economically, politically thriving liberal democracy today. And as you said, Dr. Mansourov, South Korea is paying close to $1 billion, over $900 million. And that was the negotiations during the former President Donald Trump's term when he brought up SMA, and South Korea responded, and they upped their contribution there. So they're paying significantly. So yeah, I mean, it's a great ally, and I think just talking about removing our troops and so forth, I think it's the wrong message to be sending to the people of the Republic of Korea, because we are committed, and we show that with the Washington Declaration, the extended deterrence commitments we have, because we don't want nuclear proliferation in East Asia or in the Middle East or anywhere. And this is where the U.S. stands there and says, believe us, this is our word. When we say extended, we are committed to extended nuclear deterrence commitments and that nuclear umbrella applies to certainly our allies in South Korea, Japan, and others. That's important. Our credibility is on the line, so that's important. So let me ask this question further to Dr. Mansourov's question on the ROK, the Republic of Korea. We will have a meeting, or I should say South Korea, Japan, and China will have a meeting at the latter part of this month, the end of May, where China's Premier Li Qiang will be meeting with his counterparts, Prime Minister Kishida and Yoon Suk-yeol, President Yoon Suk-yeol. So, General Gregson, given some of the commentary that came out of Beijing after the Prime Minister Kishida's summit with President Joe Biden, and it was somewhat critical of Japan, of some of the things that, I think the correct things that Prime Minister Kishida said. What do you think will transpire at this summit with Premier Li Qiang and certainly the ROK's President Yoon Suk-yeol? What do you think China will be putting on the table? And what do you think they will be sort of alluding to, if not demanding, of South Korea and Japan, given that they are their major trading partners, and security in the region is very, very important as we speak?
I would think that China would demand to be treated as the first among equals in Asia, and would insist that Japan and other nations respect Chinese sovereignty. By that, I mean accept China's illegal allegation that they have undisputed historical sovereignty to all of the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and that the Senkakus really are China's, et cetera. It won't be stated quite so baldly, but I think they will lean on that. By the way, to further the discussion about the alliance between the United States and Korea and the United States and Japan, the Secretary of the Navy has recently called for Japanese and Korean cooperation in ship repair, ship overhaul, and shipbuilding. And Ambassador Emmanuel was quick to point out that, who's, by the way, is solidly behind us, was quick to point out that doing work on our ships in Japan will free up American shipyards to concentrate on new construction. Part of the thing I mentioned, when we only have 290 ships, that number is very fragile because we're decommissioning ships faster than we're commissioning them. And by a recent Department of the Navy study that took 45 days, the Department of the Navy has an 11-year accumulated backlog in getting ships out of the shipyards. We're that far behind schedule.
Wow.
We're not going to fix this in the near term without help. And I predict that, and I hope that Secretary Del Toro's plan gets some legs, and we have allied cooperation on getting more holes in the water so that we can better compete with China. But this is part and parcel of the industrial base that we let decline because we thought there was nobody left to fight after 1992.
Thank you, General Gregson. Alexander, we're running out of time, so one quick question, if
Yes or no question. Considering what President Trump said about and his thinking about the value of U.S. ROK alliance, his veiled kind of threats to pull out our forces from Korea, do you think, yes or no, the alliance will survive the second Trump administration or not?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so it's strong enough to survive even the second Trump administration.
But that's making a huge assumption there. And it ties into Ambassador DeTrani's emphasis on extended deterrence. Deterrence is an undoubted ability to prevail. The Koreans have been talking about getting nuclear weapons since the late 90s, when I first started working on DoD policy and got acquainted with the Koreans. This is a big issue for them, and the Biden administration's unprecedented surfacing, literally, of strategic nuclear assets and bringing them into ports in Korea on occasion to demonstrate to the Koreans that, yes, these ships are real, they're in Asia. Not that they need to be in Asia to be within range, but to demonstrate that we're there. The best answer I've heard when the Koreans have unofficially, officially raised the issue of putting nuclear weapons back on the peninsula has been that, one, there is no military necessity to have nuclear weapons on the peninsula physically. Two, that if Korea has a valid political need to have weapons on the peninsula, we can do that, but they will be our weapons and part of our arsenal and under our control because we have the rest of the arsenal. This is a delicate issue. I think the alliance will survive. In what form, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows and can do this, but the idea that this is that we need to reduce our forces because we're unhappy with the Korean contribution, which, by the way, is very generous. You have to see the new place they built for us, Camp Humphreys, down by the coast. I forget the name of the town, but it's huge, and it gets us out of one of the densest urban areas in the world, downtown Seoul, and that's where we were stuck. And it was difficult to go from one place to another because of the traffic. And I'm sure we were irritating to the Koreans because, number one, we were occupying buildings built by the Japanese when they were colonial masters of Korea. And it was just, it's a bad deal all the way around. Now we're in a different place. It's modern. It's terrific. Nobody serving Korea complains about host nation support because it is indeed very, very generous and professionally done. The big question, as Ambassador DeTrani brought up, is the validity of our deterrence, extended and otherwise. We've got to have an undoubted capability to prevail, and that's where my biggest worry is, that we're losing that capability because of China's massive building program, and we're losing that capability because of China's political warfare in all the various countries out there. You realize they're close to being able to form a relationship with the Solomons that will allow them to build a base there. The Solomons is where Guadalcanal was, and that was considered enough of a threat to Australia that's where we made our first amphibious landing in World War II. The geography matters here. They're already in Vanuatu, which takes care of the eastern part of the eastern flank of Australia. It's time to wake up and realize that this is a fight. It's just not with bullets yet. And we need to bring forth all of our effort. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but as far as Ukraine and Japanese support, Minister Hayashi, when he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, went to Ukraine and inked a deal where Japan's going to provide major support to rebuild Ukrainian infrastructure on the fly while the fight is going on. So it's not Japan sending troops. I would argue that Japan is making a much more substantive contribution with the Japanese International Cooperation Agency and the Japanese Bank of International Cooperation to rebuild Ukraine while Russia's trying to destroy it.
Well, General Gregson, let me just say your comments are just right on the mark. Very insightful. I can't say enough about that and about your service to the country and to our allies and partners. And you're so correct. The deterrence, and that's the commitment we have with the United States in our Washington Declaration and other commitments we've made on extended nuclear deterrence, extended deterrence. Deterrence is so critical, and our credibility is so critical on that. So, and further to Dr. Mansourov's question, yes, the Republic of Korea is paying a lot to, and we all visited Camp Humphreys. We've seen this. We've all been there. They carry their load. They carry it well. But what a model it is! It really is a model when we talk about democratization. We talk about our values. What the Republic of Korea shows to the world of what countries can look like and what they can achieve when they embrace these values. So thank you, General Gregson. Oh, great conversation. Thank you, Professor Dr. Mansourov. Your questions are always right on the mark. Let me just thank the Washington Federation and Dr. Michael Jenkins for all you do to permit us to come and have these discussions. So thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Ambassador DeTrani, for a wonderful program. And General Gregson, this has just been excellent. So many insights and also really visionary thinking. We're going forward for peace, and America's leading the way. And Dr. Mansourov, your questions are always bring out much more understanding. I want to thank the Washington Times for covering this program, which gives it some reach across the world. And we want to thank the Universal Peace Federation for their sponsorship too. And we really look forward to seeing you next month. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you.